OnePlus just launched two new phones, the OnePlus 8 for their traditional lineup, and continuing the new Pro lineup that they started last year, the OnePlus 8 Pro. Now, OnePlus sent me a OnePlus 8 Pro to borrow for a review, and I've been using it long enough that I think I can do a complete walkthrough on it for you guys. Now, if you're not familiar, complete walkthrough in this channel is where I try to go through every single feature I possibly can on a new device so that you guys are better prepared should you be in the market to actually go buy one. With that said, there's a lot to go through. So, let's get started with the hardware. Firstly, we have an AMOLED 6.78-inch 3168 by 1440 resolution, 19.8 by 9 aspect ratio, very curved display. By default, the screen resolution is set to 2376 by 1080 to conserve power, but you can change that in the settings. We have a 120 Hz refresh rate, which makes the device feel smoother. You can actually change this from 120 to 60 if you want in the display settings, but if you select 120, it'll actually switch between the two automatically based on what you're doing on the screen at the time. So hopefully that'll save some battery life. There's a setting in here also to boost less than 120 Hz content up to 120 Hz to make it smoother that you can turn on called MEMC, or Motion Estimation Motion Compensation. It'll only work in apps that support it though, and on this device it shows the photo gallery, YouTube, and Netflix as the only ones so far. Honestly, I'd probably only want to turn this on if I was watching like sports or some type of action, as increasing this on movies, for example, ends up producing what's known as the soap opera effect, where things just seem too real because of the smoothness, almost like a home video. But that's up to you. That screen also supports HDR10+, and actually has HDR boost built in to try and upgrade SDR content that you watch to higher dynamic range with increasing the contrast and colors. Now, it's off by default, but you can turn it on in the display settings. Now, the screen also has a built-in blue light filter that reduces the blue light coming from the panel underneath by about 40% apparently. It's similar tech that you find in some glasses manufacturers that does this without actually changing the visible color coming from the display. So it's just a nice thing to have regardless, as it's supposed to reduce strain on your eyes. Inside that screen, we have a 16 megapixel f2.45 aperture Sony IMX471 sensor with 1 micron sized pixels that aren't binned. And so when you take a photo, 16 megapixels is what you'll get when using the full sensor's 4:3 aspect ratio at least. The phone itself comes in 3 colors: Onyx Black, Glacial Green, and Ultramarine Blue, which is what I have here. And if you know me, you know it's this or the green for me. Bright tech colors, all day, please and thank you. The device is made out of Gorilla Glass 5 on the front and on the back, and the device is IP68 rated, so it can be submerged underwater for up to 30 minutes at a depth of 1.5 meters. Moving around the device, we have our volume rocker on the left, nothing at the top, our power button and very OnePlus notification slider that can be set in 3 positions, ring, vibrate, and silent, are on the right. Also, that slider is much more sturdy this time compared to the OnePlus 7 Pro, thankfully, so there'll be less accidental switching profiles, which occasionally happen to me with that phone. Now on the bottom, we have our dual SIM card tray, one of our 2 speakers that are Dolby Atmos optimized, the other is in the earpiece, and our USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type-C port. That port is also capable of 30-watt fast charging of the 4510 milliamp battery that's inside using the included Warp Charge 30T charger that can supposedly give you 50% in 23 minutes. But, as usual, let's do an albeit unscientific test and see how much charge we get. Also, we have something else that OnePlus users have been asking for, myself included, for forever: wireless charging. Now, not too long ago when pressed about why they weren't including wireless charging, Pete Lau, the CEO of OnePlus, basically said that they didn't think it was fast enough to include and wanted it to be on par with the wired charging speeds. Well, now it is. The device is capable of 30-watt wireless charging. It does, however, require a special fast wireless charger from OnePlus though, and that costs an additional $70. But it will charge at the standard 5 watts if you put on any other wireless Qi charger, and 10 watts if you put it on a Pixel wireless stand as well, which is nice. And a slick addition, regardless of how you charge it, is the fact that you can use Google Assistant's ambient mode to basically convert it into a Google Home while it's charging. Now, something interesting about the wireless fast charger, by the way, is the little slit here that actually blows air using a fan on the back of the device. This is apparently OnePlus's way of keeping the device cool at those higher wattages. On the phone, you can actually set it to turn this fan off, or even automatically turn it off during certain hours, like bedtime. But you'll get slower charging speeds. Now, personally, the fan isn't loud at all to me, and I ended up keeping it on as sort of like a white noise while sleeping. It's kind of nice. Really quickly though, let's also test that charger and see how fast that works. We also have reverse wireless charging to charge other Qi-enabled devices on the back of the phone, which I'm glad to see becoming more of a standard on flagships personally. And finally, let's see how fast it discharges doing, again, an unscientific test of streaming a 1080p YouTube video for 10 minutes, and we'll see what we lose. OnePlus actually upgraded their vibration motor as well, and it is definitely stronger. You can tell a lot when you're playing games. The speakers are also really loud, but I also think I'm kind of hearing some distortion when played at full volume. Under the hood, we have a Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 processor paired with either 8 gigs or 12 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM, and either 128 gigs or 256 gigs of UFS 3.0 storage. For security, we have an optical in-display fingerprint scanner that is pretty responsive, and we have the option to use facial recognition from the front camera as well. Connectivity, we have Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.0, NFC for Google Pay, and Sub-6 5G built in on all models. There's also a Verizon-specific model, though, that will have both Sub-6 and millimeter wave built in to that. Moving around the back, we have what OnePlus calls a quad camera system, and while that's technically right, one of those cameras is a color filter sensor. Instead of being able to take photos with it, it actually grabs color data while taking photos and can allow you to alter the colors easier in real time. And maybe it somehow helps when you're taking normal photos, but there was no mention of that I could find. The only manifestation of this that I could actually find on the phone seems to be these filters that you can cycle through when taking a photo or doing a video. And you'll notice that the camera view jumps slightly where you imagine the color sensor would be taking the photo from itself when you switch to the photochrome, the last one. Interesting. As for the other cameras you'll actually use, the first is our main 48 megapixel f1.7 aperture optically stabilized camera, which is the second phone now that I can think of to use the new Sony IMX689 sensor. The first being the Oppo Find X2 that I did a video on earlier, and I'll leave a link for that. And it's the same situation here since Oppo and OnePlus are related companies. Now, more on that in another video though maybe. As such, it also by default bins the pixels to get lower resolution but much better low light sensitivity. It takes collections of 4 of the 1.12 micron sized pixels it has and combines them to get a 12 megapixel 2.24 micron sized image. That sensor is also 1 by 1.43 inches in size, and so this combined with those larger pixels in bin mode means much better low light images, but it also means that you get a lot more bokeh, the blurred separation between a subject and the background, without using the software-enabled portrait mode. For those keeping score, by the way, that sensor and pixel size is very similar to the new S20 Ultra, just slightly smaller. But considering the original pixels being binned are larger than the 108 megapixel 0.8 micron ones being binned in sets of 9 instead of 4 on the Ultra, I'm very curious to see how it holds up against the Ultra, and I'll be posting photo comparisons of these and other phones as I usually do on my Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. So you can just follow me at The Unlocker with the E missing in the word unlocker for that. The main camera also sports dual native ISO, meaning that it is optimized to shoot at a specific high ISO and a low ISO. This allows the camera to choose the lower native ISO when things are brighter, but then switch to the higher native one when things get dark to reduce noise in the image. Another thing that's interesting about this sensor is that it supports all pixel PDAF instead of the more traditional dual pixel autofocus. The general idea here is that the sensor can use 100% of the pixels to detect focus, as well as has some changes to the sensor's micro lens layout, and without going too far down that rabbit hole here, that means it can detect edges better and focus faster, as well as focus better in low light. Now, in addition to the main sensor, we have a 48 megapixel ultra-wide camera that has a 120 degree field of view and an f2.2 aperture. The interesting thing here about this camera is the fact that OnePlus, again like Oppo, put a Sony IMX586 in here, which is basically the flagship sensor most phones launched with last year as their main sensor, including the OnePlus 7 Pro, by the way. It's a half-inch sensor with 0.8 micron sized pixels, so it's nice to see them put in an already proven sensor as their ultra-wide. Hopefully, that should mean that switching to the ultra-wide won't translate to a much worse quality image as we have seen in the past with other devices. And finally, we have an 8 megapixel telephoto camera with an f2.44 aperture with 1 micron sized pixels. Apparently it's a 3 times optical zoom, and it can do a digital zoom of up to 30 times, which, as usual on these phones, basically looks like an oil painting. For video, it can record in up to 4K at 60 frames a second, but also has cine modes, as OnePlus calls them, for 4K 30 and 4K 60. And this essentially just changes the aspect ratio of the video from 16:9 to a more cinematic looking 21:9. You can also select to shoot in HDR to boost the colors and contrast, but it's limited to 4K 30 or 1080p 30. Also, while both optically and electronically stabilized already, you can tap the Super Stable button to further stabilize the video, but again, limited to 1080p 30 and 4K 30. I have to say though that it's nice to see that both of these modes at least allow you to shoot 4K, where on some phones it brings you down to 1080p and you can't go any higher than that at all. For those wondering, the front camera can shoot in 1080p up to 30 frames per second, and this is what that looks like and what the built-in microphones sound like. Okay, let's dive into the various other camera modes that OnePlus has included. Portrait mode, which uses software to blur the background behind a subject to create a faster aperture look from a mirrorless or DSLR camera. Slow-mo, which records in either 720p at 480 frames a second or 1080p at 240 frames a second and plays the video back in slow motion. Pro, which allows you to control the camera settings manually like ISO, shutter speed, etc. Also, worthy to note that it allows you in this phone to actually shoot in RAW as well. Panoramic mode, which is your standard mode that we're used to seeing now on most phones, but it lets you start taking an image and then pan the camera to have it stitch multiple images together to capture a wider, more panoramic shot. Time-lapse allows you to record a video and it'll automatically play it back sped up. Something else I appreciate they put in here is a macro mode, which you can just tap the icon at the top and then you're able to take photos much closer up to the subject. Some manufacturers put in an actual macro camera for this, but this is just a button you tap and it works on all of the cameras, so that's nice. And finally, Nightscape, which uses AI in multiple shots of various exposure levels, including long exposure shots, to create a much better low-light image. You can check out my decoder episode on night mode and how it actually works at the link here. Moving on to software, the OnePlus 8 Pro is running Android 10 with OnePlus's Oxygen OS 10 on top. Because of this, it'll have very similar functions to any OnePlus Android device, but for anyone not familiar with it, let's just touch on a few of the more standout features that OnePlus has added. Firstly, you can tell they optimized the crap out of it. OnePlus has sort of always been known for having this very stock-like Android experience, but even sitting in next to a device with what we now consider stock, I suppose, the Pixel 4 XL, it seems to run just as smooth, if not sometimes smoother, and even with the 120 Hz turned off, by the way. Both of those things has always made it one of my favorite manufacturer UIs. Something else I just want to give them credit for, can I also just say that I love when you swipe to the left of the home screen here, you get Google News. Like, actual Google News, instead of a copy of this that most OEMs try to put here. We have Horizon Light, which is similar to what other manufacturers do with their curved displays, and OnePlus has added it as well. It's basically a notification light that will show when you get any incoming notifications, but it's a nice touch for when the phone is laying on a table and it lights up the edges. OnePlus has also added a game space mode that organizes all of your games in one place and lets you control things like blocking notifications, optimizing the performance of the chipset or network, etc. while using a game. We have Quick Launch, which is a feature that I think is kind of interesting. It allows you to set up shortcuts to do specific actions in an app or just launch an app itself when you continue to keep your finger pressed down on the fingerprint sensor when you're unlocking the phone. I can imagine this could be kind of handy. Parallel Apps gives you the ability to clone any messaging apps to let you have more than one account on the device for that app. So 2 WhatsApps, 2 Telegrams, Messenger accounts, etc. And finally, App Locker. This lets you encrypt specific apps and not allow you to open them without your lock screen PIN or fingerprint. By the way, if you want to learn more about what encryption actually is and how it works, I also have a decoder episode on that. I'll link that here as well. The OnePlus 8 Pro is available on April 29th, and I've left the link below for the cheapest price that I could find on it for anyone interested. Now, plenty of people have pointed out that OnePlus seems to slowly be increasing their prices with every launch, and it seems that that trend has not changed. The OnePlus 7 Pro was $669 when it launched, while the OnePlus 8 Pro is now $899 for the 8GB 128GB configuration and $999 for the 12-256 model. The Ultramarine Blue, by the way, only comes in the 12-256. There you guys, let me know what you guys think about OnePlus slowly raising their prices every year, or not so slowly, depending on how you look at it. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. If you like this video though, please thumbs up it or share it. It's greatly appreciated. Also check out the rest of the channel. If you like what you see there, please subscribe and ding the bell next to the word subscribe so you get notified when I do new videos. Also, I left a link below to my email newsletter. It goes out once a week. It has all the videos that I do here, plus tips and tricks and other fun things that I do on the website that don't necessarily make it here to video. So please check that out as well. As always though, regardless, thanks for watching.